Namaste. Thank you for having me, Gopalji.
Go ahead.
Yeah, basically, we are going to talk about what the real history of India is. And one of the reasons this is important to discuss is whenever I go around talking to people, it's amazing, people of especially my age, people that are first generation, the view they have about Indian and Hindu history, it is so outdated and things have changed so much that I found it's very important to let the listeners know what the current thinking is, which is much better for our ancestors, and it gives them a little more credit than the old history that we're used to reading gives our ancestors any credit.
All right, so what exactly are the current accepted what's the current accepted information about?
Before we do that, let's go with what everybody has studied in school in India. Just briefly mention what that theory is, where we came from. Then we'll talk about the newly accepted information that has come out in the last 30 to 40 years. Anyway, the thing that you probably read in high school is that that North Indians are fair-skinned Aryans that came from Central Asia sometime around 1500 BCE, about 3,500 years ago from today. And they were fair-skinned, they were from Central Asia, and they were barbaric, and they were nomadic. And they came in and they took a beautiful civilization called the Indus Valley Civilization, and they drove the Dravidians that used to, live in that Indus Valley Civilization south towards, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, and then they took over the whole North Indian culture. That's the theory that most Indians and Hindus and everybody else has learned, and that's what they believe in. Now, before I talk about the new theory, a lot of people that I talk to that say, hey, why is it important? Why is history important? What's today is more important. Well, it could be a long lecture by itself talking about why history is important. But let me tell you the effect that this theory has had. We'll go backwards. Instead of talking about new theory first, let's talk about the effect that this theory has had on us, and you'll realize how profound this effect has been. First of all, this theory that the British missionary historians like Marnier Williams, Max Miller, he was German, but he was working for the British in India, Sir William Jones, Griffith, all these historians came up with this theory. And like I said, basically what the theory said is that the earth, because the book of Genesis says, in the Christian history says, earth was created magically in 7 days in 4004 BCE. They'll come up with an exact date, right? Then, of course, it's widely accepted in Christian texts that in 2000 BCE there was a big Noah's flood. That's where a lot of people dispersed everywhere. So these people had to tie every other event to these two, because these were givens. They were unmovable. Earth was created in 4004 BCE, like it or not. So they had to put a date to the rest of the development around they assumed that the whole civilization started right in these areas. Babylon, Sumeria, Mesopotamia. So they disregard any history before, anywhere in the world before 4000. Because, anyway, so the effect that this theory had, let's talk about those. There's many bad effects, and once you realize the effects, then you'll realize why history is important. First of all, it divided Indians into the light-skinned North Indians and the dark-skinned Dravidians, of which we'll talk later. There was currently accepted theories absolutely don't give you any proof of any different races within India. There are different cultures, but there are different races. Then it gave the British an excuse to conquer India, because they basically indirectly told us, look, we are just one of many that came and conquered you. First there were these Aryans, then there were Greeks, Persians, Scythians, Turks, Arabs, Portuguese. So it gave them justification to conquer and remain in India. Then the other bad thing that came out of this Aryan invasion theory was that they tried to prove, and they pretty much convinced us, that our Vedic culture, the Hinduism, which was called Vedic culture, which is a more appropriate name for it, was much later. They dated much later, and hence it was derived from Middle Eastern and European cultures, the Mesopotamia, Sumeria. And Hinduism is seen as a later development from Christianity. In fact, even though this was a twist, and we'll talk later how this 1500 BCE Aryans coming to India was totally wrong, now they're trying to further push this theory. There was a seminar last March or April in New York of some conservative Christians, which were trying to show that Jesus was in India, and they're trying to push the date of the Vedas further into the 2nd and 3rd century AD, which is totally ridiculous. But let me tell you something. In history, the way it works is, if you keep repeating a lie a couple hundred times, after a couple hundred years, it kind of becomes the truth. So they have the gall to try to say our Vedas were in the 2nd or 3rd century CE. There's a whole conference in New York for this, just so that they can say, oh, this obviously came from Christianity and Jesus. So that's one bad thing that happened on this. The other thing that happened is, they have convinced us Indians and the world that science in India were given by Greeks, which is actually the other way around, which is a whole discussion by itself. We won't touch on that. But briefly, let me tell you, in the 6th century BCE, Pythagoras came to India, and we've talked about that in other lectures, and that's how science went. Whatever little enlightenment Europe had in terms of Greece happened in the 6th century CE, because before that, it's very well known, the Minoans that were in Greece in approximately the 2nd millennium BCE, they were not that advanced. Their culture was not as advanced as the Greek culture, as is evidenced by all the great Greek texts you must have read. So they basically called the Indian culture, the Vedic culture, very primitive, and they have called, by basically calling the alien invasion theory into play, they basically reduced the Vedas into, and I quote here, primitive poems of uncivilized plunderers. That's what they call the Vedas. The other bad thing of the alien invasion theory, which is basically our distorted history of India and Hinduism, has done is it has discredited all our Hindu literature. Because basically, hey, Hindu literature is now coming from Central Asia, and it's barbaric people, and it destroys all our history and genealogy. If you look seriously at the dates they're giving, and that it came from outside, all our genealogy, all our kings, all our gods that are mentioned, all our history is wiped out because of the alien invasion theory. Because, if it came 1500, see, they're saying these people came from outside. 1500 BCE they started, and 100 BCE they kept coming. So these 1400 years is when they came in. That completely, takes away our Mahabharata and all our history. In fact, the effect is so bad that most of our Indians, when I go to my mandir or wherever I go to, my Swamiji refers to Ramayana as mythological. Most Indians refer to Ramayana as mythological. So these are the direct effects of them calling our Vedas outside, as born outside. So all these things are related.
There's one more, perhaps more real impact, right now in Tamil Nadu, which is the Dravidian politics, is entirely based upon a separatist movement. That Dravidians are different than the Aryans, and there is all these political parties that are based fundamentally upon the principle of difference between Dravidian and Aryan. And when I was in school, when I passed out of 12th grade, and I had to get admission in a college, I didn't get admitted in any college in Tamil Nadu because of reservations. And I remember actually wondering aloud to myself, am I a Dravidian or an Aryan?
Well, the answer to that, Kalyanji, I already mentioned that they were successfully able to divide us permanently into South and North, Dravidians, and people in the South are using that. That was not the only division they caused. They also basically claimed, the Aryan invasion theory also claims, that the light-skinned Aryans were basically Brahmins, and they converted the local Dravidians into Shudras, and they basically discriminated and used them. We should reserve some time for call later, Gopalji, because this is a continuous talk that is very important to hear in its entirety. So basically they made us into the Aryans, the so-called Aryans, into plunderers who invaded the Shudras, and that's how the Dravidians were born. So basically, not only did they divide us along Aryan and Dravidian lines, which there's no basis now, we'll talk later, they also divided us in different classes, and that's what the Marxists today in India are using as a class struggle. The other thing that the Aryan invasion theory and this distorted history of India did is, it lets the West dominate by proving that they are a superior culture, and they are the one that had a superior in the original culture and religion. And Hindus, the effect that this has had on Hindu minds is that we feel that our culture and religion is not as great as what our rishis and sages have said, so we've developed a permanent inferiority complex. It has affected our psyche permanently. Hindus in general are ashamed of their culture, and this is evidenced in the writings of a lot of people. Nehru talks about this. If you look at Shashi Tharoor's writings, who almost became the Secretary General of the UN, we Hindus are basically in general ashamed of our culture since we've been told and proven, with the twisted logic, we are not scientifically advanced, or that our stuff is not historically based. And we were always termed as primitives and natives that had to look for the West for our culture, which is the typical, if you get into the white man's burden theory, that's just the typical story they spread in Mesoamerica. By the way, let me mention one thing here, really important. Indian culture that I'm going to show you was very advanced and great, was not the only one. There were other cultures. Mesoamerica is a whole topic of its own. The Americas had very advanced and great cultures, which the Westerners basically ran down and proved that it was